Hello everyone, hi. Hopefully people are starting to join. We'll just give people a chance to come online and then we'll get started. Just keep an eye on numbers. I can see we still got participants joining, so we'll just give a minute or so just at the start and then we'll kick off. Oh, yeah, got our first question coming. Yes, it will be recorded. I'll make sure I make a note of that so everybody knows it's being recorded. But yes, absolutely, we'll share the session. I think numbers are starting to stabilise. Maybe we can make a start and people can carry on joining. So hello and welcome to our Book Trust webinar on supporting reluctant readers at Key Stage 3. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to be the host today. I'm Lizzie Catford and I'm the Director of Children's Books at Book Trust. So if we just move the slides on, I'll got a few little bits of housekeeping at the start and then we'll carry on. So yes, we will be sharing slides and a recording of today's session, just so everybody knows. Yeah, so I've already introduced myself. So just to give everybody a sense of what we're going to be covering today, we've got a really fantastic lineup. So first off, I'll be joined by my colleague, George Barber from the Research and Impact team at Book Trust, who will be talking about the research on reading enjoyment and the benefits that reading for enjoyment brings at Key Stage 3. We're then going to have a panel discussion where I'll be joined by Emma Zipfel and Bridget Hamlet, who will be talking about the challenges schools face in engaging reluctant readers at Key Stage 3 and some of the strategies and approaches that they have used to hook kids into reading. I'm then really delighted that I'm going to be able to welcome Nathanael Lessore, author of King of Nothing, whose book is one of the Book Trust Spark Reading titles in 2025, to talk to us about his book and some of the themes that he explores through that title. And then I'll just talk a little bit about the Spark Reading Programme so everybody knows a little bit more about that. So if we can just move the slide on so I can still see we've still got people coming in, but that's fine. So I'll just cover the housekeeping. So as I've said already, we will be recording this webinar. That's just so any colleagues that couldn't join us live today are able to watch it back, but it'll be shared with everybody that signed up and who joins today. Please note that your microphone is muted, but please can you submit any questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get our panelists and our speakers to answer as many as possible over the course of the afternoon. And we'll also be sharing any slides that we use with you, so please do watch out for a follow-up email that will come to your inbox in a couple of days. Okay, can we just move the slides on, please? So we just wanted to begin with is just kicking off and ask everybody just to share their thoughts. We just wanted to hear from everybody on the call what has worked well in your setting to encourage students' enjoyment of reading, and what barriers, if any, have there been. It's really interesting. I think partly what's nice in joining these webinars is coming together with lots of colleagues with lots of different experiences, and it's a good chance for us to share. And it'll be interesting to see if we have any themes that come through that we can also then pick up on in today's discussion. But please do put your answers to that question in the chat. Fab, thank you, and we'll keep monitoring it. So first off, I'm going to hand over to my colleague George Barber, who, as I said, is going to talk us through some of the research. So over to you, George. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Lizzie. Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining this afternoon. My name's George and I'm the Research and Impact Officer here at Book Trust. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the current research on reading enjoyment at Key Stage 3 and some of the different benefits that reading can bring. So can I have the next slide, please? So to start off, I'll give you a bit of a summary of some of the main benefits of reading for children in general. And this includes benefits for children as young as babies to children in their mid to late teens. So as you can see here, we found that reading is able to support children to overcome disadvantage. And studies show that reading for enjoyment has the power to help mitigate socioeconomic inequalities, with children from disadvantaged backgrounds who achieve highly at the end of primary school being twice as likely to have been read to at home in their early years compared to their peers. And then, secondly, we found that reading supports children to have better mental well being, social skills, and strong relationships. So, within this, children who read more feel more secure, they develop deeper bonds with their parents and carers as well. And children who read more have also been found to be more likely to have healthy routines and habits, as well as better social emotional skills. And I'll touch on this a little bit later on. But one of the main reasons reading is able to support mental well-being is that it is able to provide escapism and relaxation, and it acts as a protective factor against the adversity that some children face. And then moving on to the third benefit, reading is able to support with speech and language milestones, helping children to do better at school. So shared reading provides unparalleled opportunities for a child's verbal interactions with their parent or carer. And this is especially key in the early years when children's brains experience the most growth and are most responsive to their environment. So stimulation from reading books serves an important neurological function, helping to enhance cognitive growth. And a nice example from some of the studies we looked at suggests that a child who is read to regularly at age 1 to 2 scores higher in reading, spelling, grammar, and numeracy at ages 8 to 11. And then, last but not least, reading supports children to develop imagination, creativity, and empathy. So a story can prompt dramatization, allowing children to use their imagination to visualize, verbalize, or act it out. And stories with kind of imaginative and magical elements enable children's minds to, in some ways, transcend their immediate context. And this supports with the development of creative thinking. And then in regards to empathy, stories can offer children a window where they can kind of view the experiences of others, and this helps them feel connected to the world around them. So this is just like a short summary, but if you would like to read more about some of these benefits, I've added a link at the bottom right, and that will take you to a PDF document that we recently produced, and this collates all the research that we've done relating to the benefits of reading for children. And I've also added a QR code which you can scan, and that will take you to a page on our website with some of our other research. So yeah, when you do have a moment later on, please feel free to have a look through. Can I have the next slide, please? So moving on to some of the specific benefits for Key Stage 3 children, we've picked out 3 key areas where the evidence shows that reading has the most impact. So I spoke about cognitive growth in the previous slide, particularly in relation to the early years. But it's worth noting that this benefit also applies to older children. So we've seen some studies that show that reading for enjoyment at both the ages of 10 and 16 has been found to have a positive effect on children's cognitive scores in vocabulary, spelling, and mathematics at age 16. Therefore, even if a child just entering secondary school did not read or was not read to frequently when they were younger, we would say it's not too late for them to experience some of the benefits of reading. And then similarly, when we look at attainment, children from disadvantaged backgrounds who read between the ages of 11 to 14 in their own time are more likely to achieve 3 or more A levels. And this suggests that picking up reading in Key Stage 3, regardless of previous reading experiences, can be really beneficial. And the fact that children from disadvantaged backgrounds stand to benefit the most from reading is really key too, as it indicates that encouraging a love of reading could be one way of helping to reduce the disadvantage gap. And would also say that the benefits of reading for Key Stage 3 children is not just limited to cognition and academic success either. And there's a lot of evidence that links reading at this age to positive mental health outcomes. Through fictional situations that resonate with children's day-to-day challenges, stories create a sense of comfort and safety during difficult times. And studies suggest that this provides relaxation, but also helps to equip children with healthy strategies for coping with internal struggles and life adversities, and in total boosts their resilience. And yeah, I've got a little note at the bottom there. So there's going to be some references in the slide notes, and you can also contact us if you would like to see any of those. Can I have the next slide, please? So, despite all these benefits that I've just mentioned, reading for enjoyment declines as children progress through school. So, Nielsen book data from last year shows that over 75% of boys and girls aged between 8 and 10 read books at least once a week, but this declines as children get older, with less than half of children reading once a week between the ages of 14 and 17. And as you can see, this trend is more pronounced for boys than girls, with the initial percentages at ages 8 to 11 being quite similar, and then an 11 percentage point difference at ages 14 to 17. Reading enjoyment amongst children has also decreased over time, with results from the Progress in International Reading study showing that reading enjoyment has declined overall for children in England when compared to previous iterations of the study. So this was in 2016 and 2011. The decline has been sharper for girls than boys, but for every country that took part, boys have lower levels of reading enjoyment overall. And we're seeing that this is an issue that most teachers are concerned with. So we recently commissioned Teacher Tap to run a poll for us, and over 2/3 of the 5,000 secondary school teachers who took part said that they were concerned with the overall levels of reading enjoyment in their class. And this percentage was even larger amongst English teachers specifically, with 84% expressing concern. Can I have the next slide, please? So, as the evidence suggests, this concern is definitely not unfounded, and changes in attitudes to reading are also impacting academic outcomes. So, in 2023, the Programme for International Student Assessment found that although England does rank fairly high compared to other countries, overall reading scores have declined by 9 points since the last assessment in 2018. And then on top of this, in both the PISA and PIRLS studies, pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds scored significantly worse on reading measures than those from less disadvantaged backgrounds. And this seems to kind of highlight the prevalence of the disadvantage gaps in relation to reading outcomes. And it's unclear exactly how much of this is directly due to the decline in the enjoyment of reading, but in every country that took part in the PISA study, pupils who like reading scored higher on average than pupils who do not, suggesting that there is a link there. And I've included this quote from a teacher we've worked with, which I think gives a really interesting first-hand perspective of the changes in how children identify themselves as readers. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to read that before we move on to the next slide. Cool. Can we have the next slide, please? So we've seen evidence that reading enjoyment is declining, and we've seen how this relates to reading outcomes. But what's important to ask is, why is reading enjoyment continuing to decline? And there are a number of possible reasons for this. And I'd like to finish off my part today by talking about three of the most key. So firstly, we are seeing an increased use of other forms of entertainment and media, which can be more appealing to children. And in particular, technologies such as phones and iPads give instant access to short form, quick consumption content in the form of apps like TikTok and YouTube Shorts. And many children also play video games, whether this is through a mobile device or a games console. So according to Nielsen, 52% of 14 to 17-year-olds play video games, 53% visit YouTube, and 64% visit social media sites daily. And this is not to say that technology is inherently harmful or bad, but rather it's something that many children would prefer to engage with in their spare time instead of reading. And then looking at the second reason, the spare time that children do have can actually be very limited due to competing priorities. So many children obviously do extracurricular activities after school and on weekends. And then on top of this, as children progress through school, the amount of homework and revision they need to do starts to increase. So as a result, it can be difficult for many children to find the time to read for enjoyment. And in the limited time that children do have, studies suggest that they would prefer to speak to their friends or do activities that they can dip in and out of. So this includes social media. In contrast to reading, which is often viewed as a time-consuming activity requiring a lot of attention. And then parents themselves can also face challenges in encouraging reading and enjoyment at home. So from time pressures they experience to not knowing what books their children might enjoy, parents do not always feel confident sustaining their children's reading habits. And this is clearly something that's being recognised by teachers, with 76% of Key Stage 2 teachers who responded to our Teacher Taps survey saying that the gap in support from parents creates a significant barrier to encouraging reading enjoyment. And we recognize that there is no like one-stop solution to reversing these barriers, but they are something we take into consideration when designing our programs. And I know that our panel, who will be speaking next, will touch upon some of the ways that these barriers can be mitigated. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand back over to Lizzie, who will introduce the panel. And yeah, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, George. There's so much food for thought there, and I think that's really powerful. The quote that you shared and asked us all to read on the screen about participant saying about children who've decided to not identify, who've lost that kind of identity as a reader and put up those barriers. And I think absolutely that's what we're going to be talking about today, really, like how once students have sort of created that impression of themselves, it's not something for them. How do you break that down and re-bring them back in? Because actually, by and large, people do enjoy reading once they're engaged in it and start to explore it and find the books that are right for them. So without further ado, I will welcome Emma and Bridget to join me on screen to talk about some of these issues. So firstly, can I just ask you both to introduce yourselves? Emma, would you mind just giving a little introduction, who you are and your role?
Hi, everybody. I'm Emma. I work at Book Trust with authors and illustrators, but also developing some of the schools programs and resources. I taught English at secondary level for over 20 years and also worked really closely with my school library. So I know where you're all coming from and all those challenges that you are facing. But
Brilliant.
We're hopeful for the future.
We are, and it's a fight worth fighting when you see as well the role that reading for enjoyment can play, especially in things like closing that disadvantage gap, which is so important to us all. Bridget, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Bridget Hamlet. I'm the librarian at Rushmead Academy, which is a large secondary school in Leicester, and I was the School Librarian of the Year in 2023.
Brilliant, thank you, Bridget, and congratulations for being School Librarian of the Year. What an achievement! It's absolutely fantastic. So the question that I wanted to kick off with today, and maybe Bridget, I could ask you to just answer that first, and then Emma, chip in if you've got anything that you wanted to say around it. But I just wanted to ask you in general terms, what issues do you see practitioners facing in encouraging students to read for enjoyment at Key Stage 3? What are the really big issues that you face kind of day in, day out?
So it was touched a lot in George's presentation, that general motivation to read. So I would encourage everybody to read. There's one chapter in a book by Daniel Willingham. He's written a book called The Reading Mind, and it is chapter 7. I've practically committed it to memory, and it is all about reading motivation. And it's understanding, especially with teenagers and young people, it's all emotional. So we talk a lot about budgets and things like that. We all know about those barriers. Everybody has those barriers. But when you can really understand what makes a student choose this activity over this activity, that's really important. And ultimately, the biggest challenge we've got compared to other teachers and lessons, for example, we're trying to influence people doing stuff in their free time. It's not what they're doing in our lessons. It's their free choice to do in their free time at home. We can't be there. So it's really having that far-reaching influence on them in a positive way. And so having expert staff, having really attractive books, those are things that are crucial to that motivation. They're not just an extra add-on. They are important.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you're absolutely right. It cuts to it, doesn't it? As humans, we're all emotional beings, really. And why would we assume that teenagers would be any different, really? And especially that age where you're going through so much and so much change and sort of trying to, work out who you are and all of that. I think it's a really powerful point. Really well made, Bridget. Thank you. Emma, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so I completely agree how the challenge of kind of encouraging them to do something outside of school is really difficult. I think we can also kind of work within school at taking away that feeling that that it's learning and that it is something that has kind of judgment attached to it, and trying to remove all of those sorts of barriers so it is something that they can kind of really engage with as individuals, and kind of meeting them where they are with whatever it is that they want to read. We encourage that, talk about it with them, and show that like we're really excited that they're reading. We're not going to mark it. We're not going to ask them comprehension questions. I think that is really important in motivating them.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And building that confidence, because I think it's important to remember that so many young people, that they really lack confidence. Doesn't matter what the kind of bravado is or the kind of external person that they present, you know, everybody has those doubts, don't they? And if you've had those experiences where you haven't felt like you've been successful with reading, or you're used to, like you say, to the judgment or seeing those marks come in that don't reinforce that this is something for you, like you have to kind of take that step back, don't you, to really break that down and start again with building that kind of that positive association with reading, and that's starting to see that's something for you. That's really interesting. Emma, would you be able to sort of build on that? And you touched on it there, but like, how can schools kind of create that difference? Because obviously, you know, it is really important that children like develop those other skills as part of their kind of academic career. But how do you kind of create that difference between this is reading for enjoyment and that this is the kind of reading that you're going to do within the curriculum? And how important is it to create sort of different space around that, or in your experience?
I think for English lessons, for example, for some children, they find it really disconcerting because it's not like maths where there's a right and wrong answer. They kind of might give an answer or think of an answer, but they really don't know whether they're kind of hitting the right spot or not. So I think kind of moving away from that idea of kind of right and wrong and really throwing it over to the students themselves. So when you're talking about books with them, like really step back, ask them to respond, find out how they feel about things. Don't challenge them, don't tell them they've missed out, I don't know, spotting a metaphor. Really get them to respond and share their feelings about what they've read. I think also something that is really important for students, teenagers particularly, they're very self-obsessed. That's where they are in their development. So making it about them as well. So what connections can they find with what they've read? Have they ever felt something similar? Do they know a friend that's been in a similar situation? Is it something they would love to explore themselves, and why? And kind of just throwing it back to them and really making them the center of the discussion and kind of moving it away from the book. And then you trick them into connecting with it and they don't even realize.
That is brilliant. Very, very sneaky. And I love what you were saying there as well about moving it away from being a deficit model where you're looking to say, this is what you've kind of missed, or giving you a mark, or like, this is how it could have been better, which is again important in some aspects of learning, but like towards that real positive reinforcement of validating what they're saying. Because it's quite self-exposing when you come to talk about a book and how you've responded to it, what you've thought about it. So yeah, and I love that idea about, you know, really relating it back to them and their experience, and sort of tricking them in that way. Bridget, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think really having that distinct space as well. So having an actual library that's vibrant allows students to create that visual space between what I do in a lesson and then my reading for pleasure time. That is a real indicator. And it becomes, you know, they are very heavily weighted to what their peers do. So they want to do what everybody else is doing. So the more you can build a crowd, nothing draws a crowd like a crowd. So the more you can build a crowd around reading in your library, it's seen as a desirable thing. Oh, everybody else is doing this. I should probably be doing this too. And it takes time, but that's that distinction between what's happening in lesson and then the library is what I do in break time. And it's just a psychological separation for them as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Cool. I'm going to go for one more question, and maybe I'll see if anybody's got any questions for our panel. So do remember to put any questions that you have into the Q&A, and then we'll go through and pull some of them out. So I was going to say, like, how important do you think it is, like that kind of book talk and those informal conversations around reading and sort of helping draw out particularly reluctant readers? Like, Can you talk about that a little bit more? Emma, did you want to kick off with that around kind of book talk and formal book talk and the role it plays in all of this?
Yeah, I think it's really important just for normalizing reading. So seeing it as something that like we just do it, we talk about it, we have a little chat, and then we move on. So one of like my favorite things that we did at my school was that we had students recommend books for teachers, and I've seen someone mention it in the chat, and it wasn't just English teachers and librarians, it was teachers across the whole school, senior leadership team, support staff, admin staff, put themselves forward to be recommended a book. And then students were really excited. They picked a staff member they wanted to read a book. They didn't have to actually read anything themselves. They were just recommending. And then staff members would have these little chats with the students and say, oh, I'm on chapter whatever. Have you read it? Oh, this bit was really good. And it was really informal, but it just made that kind of that sense of reading is something that we all do. It's not just in lessons. It's not just your English teachers and librarians. It's something that we can all do and we can really connect with. And it was great for building like those relationships. And loads of the staff members also said like how meaningful it was to them and what nice chats they'd had with students. And also like some of them really were happy about the books they read. Some of them weren't so much. Some of them didn't love Dogman, but others read books that they wouldn't have discovered and were really grateful for. So yeah, it's so important.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think still so many people hold on to those old, I guess, like stereotypes around reading. That's a really nice, quiet activity. That if you're a bookworm, you know you're kind of squirreled away in a corner doing it by yourself. Whereas actually, everyone who really loves reading wants to talk about it and wants to share it because we're all social animals again at the end of the day. And that like that way, like you say, of connecting and building networks around reading are really important. Bridget, did you have anything that you wanted to add about that, about how you kind of create that conversation around reading?
So, I mean, we're really fortunate in that we've got every student in school comes through in a library lesson, like as a rota.
Yeah.
So more frequent for year 7, less frequent for the older students, but everybody's brought through the library, and that normalizes that book talk. But I also try to catch, and our students respond really well to rewards, so like merit points and things like that. So utilizing the systems already in place that the kids value already really helps me. So if I catch a student recommending a book to somebody, I'm like, I'm going to give you a rush reward for that. That's really nice. And I'm going to give you one for taking that recommendation. That's really lovely. And a simple, really weird thing that happened once, we had these like tub chairs and we had them separate. And because of me rearranging something, I had to put like 2 of them together for whatever reason. Game changer. The simplest thing, just having 2 chairs together instead of having them separate, meant now I've got 2 students, can be girls or boys, it doesn't matter,
Yes.
but they sit over one book. And it sometimes just the tiniest change makes such a big impact. And that's what we found is a weird thing. So if you like group your chairs or your soft seating in not big groups, small, like, but at least 2 people together, they just love it.
Fantastic. It is sometimes, like you say, it's the simple things, isn't it? And then if you're thinking about what are we trying to do around reading is bring people together and then kind of creating the space for that, having such an impact. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. So I'll see if we've got any questions from the crowd. If not, I've got plenty more that I would quite like to ask myself. So we've got some questions here. So do you have any suggestions or advice about getting the whole school supporting reading rather than just the English department? Either of you take it, if anyone's got anything to...
I would say there's kind of 2 strands probably that you can pull on for this. The first one is your senior leadership team. Like to have them behind you is so important because then everyone has to get on board whether they want to or not. And that can make a big difference. If you don't have a supportive senior leadership team or they don't see the importance of reading for pleasure, it's much more of an uphill struggle. However, it's not the end. You can also draw on kind of the goodwill of your colleagues. So as you know, school's really, really busy and people are always asking you to do kind of little extra things. And if you try to kind of help other people out when they want someone to do something for their department, for example, you can hopefully then pull in a favor when you say, right, I need you to volunteer to read a book recommended by a child or do some one-to-one reading at this time. So kind of really drawing on the kind of goodwill of your colleagues, and I think is what you can do if your senior leadership team isn't supporting you.
Yeah. And do you have any tips about the kinds of things that work with the senior leadership team? Is it around things like the evidence base? Because obviously George talked us through, there's quite a compelling evidence base around the role that reading can play around children's attention and their capacity, like across multiple factors. Is that the kind of thing that you found that was most powerful with them, or were there other lines of argument that you kind of use to kind of hook people in on this, that this is something we need to prioritize within our school?
Yeah, so I think the senior leadership team, they want to know about numbers, figures, and exam results at the end of the day. So I think when you talk to them, you kind of push that angle. You talk about the fact that if your students are reading for pleasure, they're going to be better readers. They're going to excel in not just English, but all across the board. They're likely to do better. That's kind of the thing you can
meet
push.
them with what their interest is. Yeah,
and then obviously when you're looking at kind of reading for pleasure, you're not telling the students this is all about your exam results, because it's not. This is separate. This is something for you that is going to make you feel good, give you something to talk about with your friends, something to connect with. But yeah, for the senior leadership team, it's numbers game.
Brilliant. I'm going to take another question because I realise there's so many we could answer. So is there any evidence and or impact in the quality and location of your school library? My concern is that ours is too small and hidden away. We'd love to evidence impact of where and what a library looks like to put to SLT. Bridget, do you have any thoughts on that, or any insights that you can share about that?
Well, proximity to popular locations is really important, because you'll have that footfall. It really is like a bookshop in many ways, and you have to kind of function like a bookshop. Yeah. But my library is at the end of a corridor, which only has admin and offices and stuff. It's not on the way to lessons. It's not by any social areas. So when I started, I did have to sort of tempt them into coming here. So I don't know about in terms of evidence. I just know that if that is the problem you face, there are solutions to that problem. And I think that's the attitude that you have to take sometimes, especially if it's there or nowhere, then you have to make it work there. And there are ways of making it work. So it is trying to tempt them into your library, incentivize them coming into the library. I mean, I can guarantee if you put manga books out, you will have kids coming into your library no matter what. They will find that place. And then, you have to then, well, how do I explode? I call it explode the moment. So like you get it. Now, how do I make more of this? How do I get repeat customers and stuff like that? Then you have like a manga drawing competition, and you reward them, and you validate this choice that they've made, and you make them feel really big and special, and really vocalize it. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Have you guys seen this drawing? Really make them feel special in your library. It's all about building relationships and emotion. They want to come back because they love the feel of being in there, because it feels good. You get complimented.
Brilliant. And I saw somebody who's in the chat, Priya, thank you for saying yes to manga. She's managed to get kids reading 4 or 5 books a day by getting the manga out. So that's a really good tip. And so I think it focuses much more on primary schools, but at Book Trust we did run a project called Life Saving Libraries with Cressida Cow when she was the Children's Laureate. And that looked at like what it is about a library that makes that kind of fundamental difference within a school. And that might be an interesting place to look around some of the principles of what it is that a library kind of provides. And like you say, it is so much more than a room of books and sort of wherever you have to be within your skill building. It's like, how do you create that momentum and that engagement around reading? Brilliant. I think maybe we've got time for one more question. So thinking about appealing more emotionally to teenagers, does the library environment have an impact, e.g. dynamic shelving, face-out displays, genreification? Is there any evidence that physical changes can improve engagement with reading? We may not know the answer to that in terms of like the broader evidence base, but just from like your own practice, you've talked a little bit about that already, Bridget, in terms of like small changes within your own library to make it a more social space and a more inclusive space in that sense.
Yes,
making quite a big difference.
Yeah, one of the first things I did when I started at my library, which is a beautiful space. Well, it's in the little Spark Reading advertising. I love it. But I bought 300 Perspex stands so I could have as many books facing out as I possibly could in the library. it makes it more inviting. It makes it much more appealing than looking at spines of books. We definitely have multiple purpose spaces. So teachers can have a whole class in there and they can see behavior management happening in their class. So it's kind of like what Emma was saying, is you've got to meet them at their space. That includes the teachers. So if you want teachers to bring a group in, they have to picture, yes, my group will work in here. I can sit them here and I can still manage the behavior and I can still do a lesson. It will still have an impact. So it is definitely rearranging. I love having like bookshelves on casters. So if you can get your bookshelves on casters so that you can move it around, it means you can test things out and see how it works. And when something doesn't work, you can shift it without much hassle because books are really heavy. So that's, that's really, really useful, but it also creates a multi-use space, depending on how big the space is. So if you want to have author events in the library, especially when the exams are happening, lots of the other big spaces are knocked out. So you can't have lots of things happening, or even just a lecture during lunchtime or something like that. The movable space is really helpful for that. In terms of evidence around the impact, I don't know. Peters might have some information.
So sharing of the practice, I think, is always useful. In some ways, it's trying things out, isn't it, within your school, seeing, does this make a difference? And then not being afraid to evolve again if you think, actually, I could do this differently. I think we're probably out of time, so I'm just going to ask you both one last question, which would be, what would be the main tip you would give to colleagues who are struggling with engaging their Key Stage 3 students in reading for enjoyment? If you had to pick out one thing and say, give this a go, what would you say? Emma, did you want to kick off with that? I won't hold you to one if you.
I'll try and go for one, but there are a few things. But I think one is to read really widely and make sure that you know kids' books. Like, don't just read the ones that appeal to you. Think about your students while you're reading, and talk to them about it. Just really relax. Oh, I read this really good book. It was about this. You might like it. Leave it there. Or let them see you reading it, and they're often quite surprised to see an adult reading a kid's book, but that's how good they are. And as if anyone's read Nate's books, you will know kids' books at the moment are amazing. It's pretty much all I read, I admit. So yeah, read children's books and just have casual conversations about what you've read.
Brilliant, I love that. Bridget, would you like to give us one tip, one thing?
Yeah. For me, it's about social equity, and they can't be expected to come to the library on their own. You have to bring them to the library. So providing them opportunity, time, and space for free choice to pick their books. That's really important, because otherwise it's a punishment. If they have to come during their free time and they want to be playing cricket on the yard, they're not going to come in. So making sure that they're all brought in and it's seen as a positive experience, that for me, that's been an absolute game changer in my school, because they are all given that equal opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We managed to cover so much in such a short time. So yeah, a huge thank you. For that. So many things I think to take away and think about. Absolutely brilliant. So the next stage is, I'm really delighted to say that I'm going to be inviting and speaking to Nathanael Lessore, who is author. Can you see I've got a background on? So King of Nothing. Hope everyone knows his book. It's one of the Book Trust 2025 Spark Reading titles. And yeah, welcome Nate. It's so lovely for you to join us. So I've got a few questions to ask you, and it'd just be lovely to hear from your perspective as you were writing your book, like how you wanted to connect with the readership, and it's such for me, like when I was first reading King of Nothing, and I think as it's described on the back cover, it's again, I don't know if I can hold it. I don't quite know where to hold it in. No, I can't manage it. I can't get it to come up. But it's described as outrageously hilarious by The Guardian, and it is an absolute, for anybody who hasn't read it, please do. It is laugh out loud funny, like a Book Trust, we've all been reading it and all embarrassing ourselves on the tube, laughing to ourselves as we read it. But I think when trying to speak to and engage young people in reading, like, why do you think humour is such a powerful tool in hooking them in? And what are the kinds of things that you're thinking about as you try to build comedy into the narrative? Because it's a really hard thing to do. You make it look easy, but it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I know it's a bit of a fluke, I guess, I just always went with the write what you know rule, and so
Yes.
just because I grew up in Peckham and I've always had like quite fun friends and I come from quite a big family as well, and so there's always quite a lot going on, and I always say like I myself am not particularly funny, but I am surrounded by funny people, and odd things always seem to happen, and so yeah, it's funny because I didn't realize like how I didn't realize I was writing funny stuff. I guess like I wasn't writing to be funny. I'm grateful that some people seem to think so, and so yeah, no, I'm happy about that, you know, and like I think a lot of it has to do with my editors.
Yeah.
The themes that are in what I hope are funny books, and it's kind of like I recently had a school visit where I was with Finn Jones was here, Simon James Green,
Yes.
and obviously like he's I think like actually funny. And I don't want to speak too much for him, but he was talking about like we don't have to choose between fun books for teenagers and books with big themes, because I think, you know, especially in his case, like both exist within one book, you know,
Yeah.
and you don't have to choose between one and the other. And I can write like silly entertaining kind of stories, and then inject the kind of bigger themes kind of throughout the editing process, which is kind of how I work. And so I think I'm a good example of what happens when someone has a good team behind them.
Oh,
Yeah, and
well,
so
that's it. Yeah, you're right. It is a journey, isn't it, creating a book? And it's that kind of relationship, like you say, with between the writer, the reader, and the editorial team who you work together to kind of create that story and bring it to life. And I think it's really true what you're saying, that you know you do cover off big themes and you don't shy away from the big issues, but you do it with a kind of lightness of touch and a poignancy around it that really come together really nicely. And I think it makes, like you say, it makes it a really entertaining, and you called it silly. It's not silly. It's fun and it's light to touch, but while still really picking up those big themes. And that leads quite nicely into my second question, actually, because when talking about sort of re-engaging those disengaged readers with practitioners, quite often they will say to us that one of the challenges they have is around young men, like young male readers and boys being less inclined to read. And actually it's interesting seeing that in the data George shared at the start, that we see that gap widening between girls and boys around that in reading enjoyment. And King of Nothing has a really relatable central protagonist in Anton, and it does explore some really big themes around masculinity. So I was just quite interested in sort of hearing your thoughts around that. And it's interesting you say that you brought that in during the kind of editorial process. But were you thinking about young male readers when you were writing it, and like how like what sort of you to sort of explore those themes, because they are big ones and important themes, aren't they?
yeah, I mean, it's kind of um I guess it's a little bit personal in that
Mm.
I had young cousins and nephews who were talking a lot about these kind of, you know, online misogynists that are appearing
Yeah,
in their TikTok. And I remember thinking my nephew was like 9 years old at the time, and I
yeah,
was kind of horrified and a bit like, how the hell do you know that name? You know?
yeah,
And so already I was quite uncomfortable that someone who spouts so much hatred towards women is in the phone of the kids so young. And then I realized like, oh wait, like this is a
yeah,
pandemic, you know. And I was saying like, you know, even before all of the arrests and stuff, because he's not the only one.
No.
There's not just one. There are so many, you know. And I remember thinking like there is a full-on war on modern women right now. And it was weird that at the time women didn't even know about it. You know, I was like this is so wild to me that, like, you know, there's people online who are just spewing hatred. And we're going back a few years now. And then so a friend of mine who's a school teacher, he was saying that his school were gearing up to do an assembly on Andrew Tate, just to tell kids like don't go anywhere near it. And then they pulled out of that assembly at the last minute because they were worried that if you tell a bunch of teenagers like not to do something, what they're gonna do, like, you know. And so that got me thinking like, okay, there needs to be a way to get an antidote to this hatred into schools, you know, without being too bait about it. And so while I was writing King of Nothing, the kind of image in my head was like, you know, when you're hiding vegetables in baby food before you give it to them, you know. So I was thinking kind of along those lines, and like, because I've seen it myself doing like school visits, like like it's not just the disrespect of female teachers, but the language seems to be getting more and more universal, and the homophobia, and you know, it all just kind of really kind of icks me out a little bit. And so King of Nothing was kind of a direct response to all of that, and I'm really like I'm really hoping it's helpful, and to you know, your point about what George was saying earlier, like one thing that I always say, one of the first things that comes up in my school visits, and it's a point that he covered extensively, is I always say, like, no matter what your race or gender or your parents' like economic like background, the more you read, the more money you are statistically gonna earn, and also the more you will probably see the world. And so that usually kind of gets kids to sit up a bit straighter in their seats, because I tell them, like, it doesn't even need to be my books. Like, if you read now, you will probably earn more money and you will probably see more of the world. Like, and if there is a bit of chatter, then usually that's the thing that kind of quells it, and they take me a little bit more seriously. And so that's always a good place to start, and especially if I'm doing a school visit, you know, in the London borough. And again, George covered this, like, you know, like quite efficiently. I always say to them, like, if you're not white, your life is probably going to be a lot harder. So give yourself the head start, read as much as possible. And even if you are white, if you're not posh, like, the same applies to you, but you know, maybe a smaller extent. So you need to like read as well, you know, and also because I wasn't a very good reader all throughout primary school. And so I told them a lot, like, you know, like the more you practice, you will get there. Like, it doesn't matter if you're in year 9 and you can't read, like, just stick to it. You'll, like, you know, it's like anything, you know, you into it will come out, like. And so so
I think that's great for kids to hear that and to have that kind of, like, I think so many people, like you say, it's exposing, isn't it? If you feel like, oh, I'm not good at this, and we know lots of young people are really competitive and they want to be good, and it's hard once your confidence has been knocked around something to kind of pick yourself back up and re-engage. But no, I think that's really fascinating how that kind of that helped to engage them. My next question, I have to be quick because I feel like we're running out of time already. It's just about it being a real coming of age novel, and I was really struck when I was reading it that it kind of sits within the tradition. We've got lots of kind of like great classic coming of age novels, but like, why do you think it's important for kids to read a contemporary one that talks to them about, you know, the issues that they face now?
And like it's all about being relatable, you know. And I think like, 'cause I'm fairly new to this kind of writing world and discourse, but the one thing that I've seen come up consistently is the drop off in teenage boys. And obviously I used to be one. and I like I think one of the big contemporary kind of like, yeah, I don't know how quickly I would have run to a dense fantasy novel if I was a teenage boy.
Yeah.
And obviously that there is a space for those types of books,
Yeah,
and a market for them. But you know, like you said, if we're competing with YouTube and we're competing with video games, like at least like make it fun, you know, like give
Yeah.
you know, and I've seen so many librarians who are so on it with their recommendations, you know, who are very much like, you know, you were like this and you were like this and you know they do such enormous kind of work in getting, you know, kids to read. And it's funny because I see lots of similar names popping up, you know, in like, you know, oh, I need a, you know, a book for my teenage son who's getting too old for Wimpy Kid, and librarians, like they're honestly the foot soldiers of getting kids, and obviously people like Book Trust like yourselves and that, you know, I feel like you guys do such big work, and I'm just a bit like, yo, listen to these people, you know, listen to librarians, listen to Book Trust, like, you know, you're staring you in the face. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. And then my final question, I'll quickly check if we've got time to take any from the audience, is just around, like, so as I've already mentioned, King of Nothing is one of Book Trust's Spark Reading titles for 2025. And Spark Reading is all about getting young people engaged in reading and having conversations around books. So just if you like could be a fly on the wall and there were a group of kids reading reading King of Nothing, what would you want them to be talking about? What would you want them to be like focused on and just chatting about? What would you be pleased to see?
like you know, I think the empathy, you know, I don't know, it's difficult for me because I guess I'm a bit simple and I like being entertained. And so if I see kids reading a book and laughing, then I'm like, oh, okay, like, you know, thank goodness I've kind of done my job a little bit. And if they have, you know, an actual discussion, like the ones in the book that do tackle toxic masculinity and you know and grief a little bit. And so yeah, I'd like kids to yeah just to discuss those big things, and also the kind of simpleton in me is just a bit like, oh, what did you find funny, you know?
Yeah,
you know,
that's absolutely it. Because sometimes, like you say, it's got to be that low stakes way in that, you know, everybody can talk about what it was they found funny or the joke or what it was, and actually that's the start of it, isn't it? That's where you're kind of getting into it. So let me have a quick look and see if there's any questions. So people are asking, do you visit schools all over the country? I think people are keen to know.
Oh yeah. I visit schools. I'm really terrible right now with my emails because I've got a deadline in just over a week, and so I'm really bad with that. But the answer is a big yes. My email address is nathanael.lessore@gmail.com. So the answer is yeah. I do I do school visits, like anywhere that I'm invited. I tend to go, and also I would say to anyone who wants me for a school visit, just badger me. Like if I don't get back to you within like 2 weeks, like send 4 or 5 emails. Yeah.
We all know that feeling of having a full inbox. So yeah, absolutely. And somebody's asking, picking up on books you were talking about, and you've touched on this. They might have sent this question in before you mentioned this. They've asked about whether or not you were a reader when you were at school, and you already said actually it wasn't. Like, what would you be able to say a bit more about your journey to becoming a reader? Was there a particular book or experience, or was it something much more gradual, like through school, that kind of hooked you in eventually into the thinking, actually, do you know what, this is something that it is for me, like I am a writer and I want to explore that, and I've got a story to tell. What was it like in your journey?
I was quite typical in that I didn't really go to my library very much at all, which is where, like, now as you know, doing school visits and that, oh, libraries are like a big deal. And the one book that had a big impact was Noughts and Crosses, Mallory Blackman, because for a hot minute,
Fantastic.
it was like, oh, books are cool now. Like, oh, wait, everyone else is reading this. I need to jump on it. And then I fell off again, basically until uni. And I was like, oh, okay, like I'm not a very good writer. I'm looking at all of these amazing writers and these readers, and it wasn't, yeah, it was back at uni. I was just like, oh, this is doable.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. I feel like we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us and just giving some insights there. Absolutely fascinating. I said I absolutely loved your book, so thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, we're nearly out of time. I think I would just share a few more bits about Spark Reading, which is a new program that we've launched at Book Trust. So if I think we've got a few slides on it, we can show you the titles that are part of this year's program, but it's all designed really around re-engaging those reluctant readers, getting kids back into reading, being able to run small reading groups within the library with some of the books coming in sets of 5, so you can run in sets of 6, you can run reading sessions around them, and they come with notes and author videos that support you in running them. So you can see the titles that we have on here. It's a pack of 40 books in total, and it costs £220, and there's a good sort of 30% discount built in on the RRP into that, but it comes with lots of assets such as reading guidance, author videos to use alongside it. And it's very much about that, how to create that informal conversation around books, really lower those barriers, hook children in with all the kind of different genres and really exciting contemporary titles that will resonate with them, and a good range of kind of access points as well. So there is something for you to use with everyone. If you have any more questions on it or about the research work that we do at Book Trust, I think you'll be able to see, we move on, if we've got a QR code or a link to the website, we just move on a slide where you can find out more information. But we'll certainly be sharing the slides today that George shared that have a good link through to like the research that he presented, but also that sort of deeper benefits of reading PDF document that summarizes the evidence base around those core benefits that you see coming through from children engaging in reading for enjoyment and building those reading habits. And just to say finally again, thank you so much to everybody who's joined us today. So Bridget, Emma, Nate and George for sharing your insights, and to everybody as well for putting aside some time on this slightly, like now quite dark afternoon in early December to talk about reading for enjoyment. I think, you know, the evidence base around this is compelling about the difference that it makes in children's lives, about how it can be a really powerful tool in closing that disadvantage gap. So thank you for your time and for engaging around it, and for all the work that you do out there to get kids reading. So thank you very much.